B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, March 29th, 2018. With Easter and Passover approaching, I'll be taking tomorrow off to spend time with friends and family, get a head start on some spring cleanup. We'll be back at you Monday, April 2nd, right here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. So it was about 3 weeks ago on March 7th when Carl Howard, our listener in Columbus, Ohio, alerted me to a series of reports that had just started to be posted at the World Socialist website. And it took me a while to track down the journalist who wrote the series and did the study. His name is Patrick Martin. And what he showed is that in the races for Congress this year, the Democrats have made a concerted effort to recruit military veterans and intelligence veterans to challenge Republicans and to challenge other Democrats in races all across the country. Now, once again, I salute Patrick Martin for a really important study and series of articles that he published. Well, today, when I opened my email this morning, I had a note from Patrick saying, hey, look, the mainstream media is trying to catch up with my reporting. That's not exactly what he said. That's my characterization of it. And so the first report is by Michael Cruz at Politico. And when I interviewed Patrick Martin, I said, this is the kind of deep dive and analysis that Politico really considers part of its game. But what's interesting is that the Politico article focuses only on military veterans, and millennials at that. They don't talk about the intelligence people who are running, including that district in Texas, where the voters had a choice of 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, all with intelligence backgrounds. And so this article focuses mostly on a guy named Max Rose, who is running for Congress in the Staten Island area, and they follow him as he door knocks and presents a 2-sided card, one that is about health care on one side, and the other side shows his military resume, a picture of him sporting a carbine assault rifle, and it said that he was a combat infantry captain in the U.S. Army. And the Politico writer says it's not a coincidence that this wave of veterans is hitting at a moment when a 5-time draft-deferring president occupies the White House and toxic partisanship has ground Capitol Hill to a virtual halt. The candidates, I'm continuing to quote here, are presenting themselves both as a moral rebuke to what they see as Trump's self-promoting divisiveness and also as a practical solution to the failure of the nation's highest legislative body to get anything done. There's nothing in here about war versus peace, about the idea that these battle-hardened Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who fought in a useless war, who fought in wars that were based on lies, are these stalwarts who will come forward and lead us out of the darkness into a new era of regime change wars and wars of choice? And Politico quotes a political scientist, Jeremy Teagan, who said, well, when you look at it, Democratic veterans actually do a little worse than comparable non-veteran Democrats in these congressional races. So if you look at the history, this is a misguided effort to pack the Democratic caucus with veterans. Now, if you go back to the 1970s, both parties featured many veterans, particularly of World War II, and some from Korea. It wasn't until the Vietnam-era veterans came of age for political office that we saw a sharp decline. And Ben Ray Lujan, the congressman, Democrat from New Mexico, chair of the DCCC, he spins this up in the same way. We're hearing from a lot of candidates who are veterans running for office this year is they're answering the call to continue to serve their communities in a different way. But there's no mention here of the intelligence people who are a major portion of the Democratic challenger field this year. It doesn't make any mention of how this can shift the fundamental focus of the Democratic Party, away from its historic base and away from the Sanders revolution of 2016. So over at the Washington Post, they pick up on the Politico story, and Greg Sargent spins this even more. He uses a quote from a tweet from Trump about our great veterans, and he says a lot of our great veterans are running for House seats as Democrats. Again, there's no mention of the intelligence veterans who are running. And it's only this pain that's a paean to millennials. A recent Pew study found that nearly 6 in 10 millennials now identify with the Democratic Party more than any other age group. A solid majority of millennials have liberal views. Only 27% approve of Trump. Well, that doesn't say that the millennials identify with Connor Lamb and these other veterans who are running for congressional seats as Democrats this year. Then the Post trots out for quotation Simon Rosenberg, a guy who I've known, interviewed him several times over the years. He runs a new Democratic consulting firm, and he's one of those corporate Democrats. He suggests that this new crop of candidates could represent the kind of front end of a transformation of the party away from the older leaders like Obama and Pelosi. Connor Lamb ran as a responsible civic leader, someone who served in the military and was a prosecutor. This civic ethos is very powerful with Democrats running in 2018. But what are their policies? And will they move us away from the wars of choice that they participated in? They don't appear to be apologetic about it. They're not even with Max Boot willing to say, I served a war of folly, and I never want that to happen again. They don't say that. And we are left with some bitter choices when we go to the polls. Well, The Intercept has done it again. Last week, John Kiriakou posted on Facebook with a comment that I couldn't quite put into context. And he warned future whistleblowers, don't go to The Intercept. Now I know why. Because an article published at The Intercept today reports that a man named Terry Albury apparently is in a plea bargain discussion. He is described as a former FBI agent and one of the few African Americans in the Bureau. And Terry Albury is accused of 1 count of unauthorized disclosure of national defense information and 1 count of unauthorized retention of national defense information. And the Minneapolis Star-Tribune linked the charges revealed Wednesday to a series of stories published by The Intercept. Now, John Kiriakou knows what he's talking about. He has been burned by The Intercept's Matthew Cole. So has Joe Hickman. And both of them talked about it in very strong terms in our interview last year. You can look it up in the search window at peterbcollins.com. And in defense of itself, The Intercept has a quote from their editor-in-chief, Betsy Reed. We understand there's an Espionage Act prosecution underway against an alleged FBI whistleblower in Minnesota accused of leaking materials. News reports have suggested that the prosecution may be linked to stories published by The Intercept. We do not discuss anonymous sources. The use of the Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers is a matter of vital public concern and an outrage. Well, this is not a complaint. The documents that have been revealed were informational, suggesting that they may have secured a plea deal or they're in the process of doing it. And they accuse Albury of possessing a document pertaining to confidential human sources and that this was somehow shared with a journalist. Now, the attorney for Albury says that he accepts full responsibility for the conduct set forth in the information. We would like to add that as the only African-American FBI field agent in Minnesota, Albury's actions were driven by a conscientious commitment to long-term national security, and addressing the well-documented systemic biases within the FBI. Now, that sounds like Jeffrey Sterling, the black CIA agent who was released from prison a few months ago, who tried to blow the whistle on racial discrimination inside the agency, and then was accused of leaking to James Risen of the New York Times. So, I take John Kiriaku's warning very seriously. And if you happen to be a potential whistleblower who happens to be listening to my podcast today, don't go to The Intercept. Just ask Reality Winner. I want to thank Joe Davis, a regular listener and a subscriber, for a tip about a story that I have missed. It comes out of Wichita, Kansas, where we have 3 white guys who are accusing the FBI of framing them around a plot to harm or kill a number of Muslim immigrants from Somalia who had opened a mosque in their community. Now, I've been slamming the FBI, as recently as yesterday, for failing to take seriously the threats from white nationalist groups and armed extremists in this country. I've been referring to Atomwaffen Division. Yesterday, my comments were in relation to my in-depth interview with reporter A.C. Thompson about Atomwaffen. Well, it appears the FBI has taken this group seriously enough to use the tactics that they've used on Muslim Americans accused of so-called terrorism. The defendants, all white men, have pleaded not guilty after they were indicted in October of 2016. Defense attorneys said yesterday their clients were entrapped by the federal government. One of the suspects, named Patrick Stein, according to his lawyer, has, quote, at times allowed his prejudice and hate to consume him. The federal government saw an opportunity to exploit Stein's fears. He said the FBI's informant was the one providing maps and aerial views of the apartment complex they were going to attack. The FBI created and directed all of this, said Richard Federico, the attorney for Allen. So this is very consistent with what they've done with Muslim-based or non-white terrorists in this country. And while I deplore any act by the FBI to frame suspects, no matter what their motivation, no matter who they are, it is interesting to see that at least in this case, they've used their expansive, unchecked powers against some white suspects. Meanwhile, the FBI and the Justice Department are accused of serious misconduct in the case of the trial of Noor Salman. She is the widow of Omar Mateen, accused of gunning down 49 people at Orlando's Pulse nightclub, and the case has gone to the jury today. And this is a case that is tainted by the disclosure very late in the trial, that the father of Omar Mateen, Sadiq Mateen, had been an FBI informant for 11 years. And it's interesting, I've got 3 write-ups on the Salman case here. The first I'm looking at is from Vice News. They don't make any mention of the disclosure about Sadiq Mateen. They don't make any mention that the confession that was extracted from this low IQ woman who had been abused by her husband, that her confession included falsehoods that they nevertheless submitted to the trial court, and the judge was really pissed about it. I don't know why Vice chose not to include those very material facts in their summation of this case as it goes to the jury. The story reads, jurors will now decide whether Salman was complicit in her husband's attack on Pulse in June 2016 and whether by aiding and abetting him she provided material support to the Islamic State group. This is a preposterous set of charges, and that becomes even more clear. And this may seem a little schizophrenic because I just attacked The Intercept for burning its sources. But there is a powerful story that I recommend to you. I'm linking to it in the show file for this podcast. Byline Maha Ahmed at The Intercept, dated today, March 29th. And she details I printed it out, it's about 17 pages long, the ongoing domestic abuse of Noor Salman. She makes references to many other cases. She adds details that I hadn't heard before. Salman told a friend who rescued her after the scene in Orlando. She recalled all the times that Omar Mateen had punched her, called her names, sexually assaulted her during their marriage. Now she's on trial, could be facing a life sentence, and the issues of abuse have been raised at the trial. And the story reads, quote, "The central dispute in Noor Salman's case is whether she actually knew about Omar Mateen's plans to carry out the attack on Pulse. U.S. attorneys have charged Salman with aiding and abetting her husband, and the testimony was conflicting because the cell phone geolocation data shows that Noor Salman never got anywhere near the Pulse nightclub. The prosecution admits that Omar Mateen's goal that night was to attack a place called Disney Village, I think it is. But at the last minute, he shifted to the Pulse nightclub after doing a search on his phone. Her defense team submitted testimony on Salman's behalf. Her behavior was entirely consistent with severely abused women who are completely controlled by a highly abusive male partner. So this is a really messy case, and it appears that they're just settling a score here because the FBI was embarrassed by its prior contacts with Omar Mateen and its failure to use all of the extra-legal and unconstitutional methods available to the Bureau to prevent him from the shooting spree at the Pulse. So they imagine that they can settle this up in the public mind by sending his low IQ, abused widow to prison for a long time, if not life. The FBI is also being slammed, and the individual here who's doing the slamming is naming James Comey and Bob Mueller, the two previous FBI directors. This is a case, and I want to tell you that this report is from Fox News, and it's clear to me that they are highlighting this case because they want to undermine Bob Mueller and Jim Comey. And if you're a regular listener, you know that I don't consider either of those men to be heroes or saints or anything close to it. So consider the source here. But Matt Schreier was an American photojournalist who went to Syria to capture images of the war. He ended up being captured himself and was held by al-Nusra for months. He was tortured, and they forced him to cough up all his passwords, and they did that to use his credit cards and bank accounts to buy computers and other gear. And during this time, according to Schreier, the FBI was monitoring those transactions, but they weren't trying to free him from captivity in Syria. And he feels that they really brutally used him to run an investigation instead of running a rescue operation of some sort. And Schreier says that he personally emailed Jim Comey. He faxed him as many as 100 times and never heard boo. So, while, again, I believe that this is being used for political purposes in the current climate, it is a legitimate complaint against the FBI. When are we going to see members of Congress launch an honest investigation into the role of the Bureau in all of these failures? Every day I like to stop for a second and thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And today, just as I sat down and I pulled up my list of subscribers, I got an email announcing that our friend in Switzerland, Olivier de Merlou, has just sent me about 100 euros. Came out to $101 and some change. And he said, "Thou shalt continue your good work." Well, Olivier, you made my day. And together with people like Susan Lewis, Alice Carlson, Steve Wazensky, and Linda Gray, you provide the validation and the financial help I need to do this podcast. So come on over and join them. You know, if you're in the Easter Bunny mode, you can share a few of those gold coins with me. Just visit peterbcollins.com. You find the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and that's where you can make your choices. So in Sacramento, just an hour-and-a-half drive from where I'm seated today, the city is still in an uproar over the police shooting of Stephon Clark, an unarmed black man. Yes, he had a criminal record, but that is not relevant in this case. And I've heard people trying to smear Stephon Clark in that manner. But today, Al Sharpton parachuted into Sacramento for the funeral of Stephon Clark, and I'm looking at the video from CBS News here, because right next to Sharpton is the brother, I believe the slightly older brother of Stephon Clark, and his name is Stevante. And CBS News has taken down the clip that I gathered yesterday when Stevante Clark really embarrassed himself and many other African Americans who have a legitimate complaint here by disrupting the Sacramento City Council meeting. He ignored the council members and the mayor. He basically said that he was taking over, and he was dropping F-bombs and MF bombs all over the place. And he may feel justified in his anger and in his grief. And I know the mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg. He's been a politician for a long time, and he showed great restraint. He even offered the microphone to Stevante, who continued to disrespect the elected officials there. And to be fair to them, they're not defending the cops. They're as outraged as most people are. And now the situation gets compounded because the Reverend Al Sharpton parachuted into Sacramento today to give this fiery eulogy.
A local issue.
Yesterday, the president's press secretary said this is a local matter. No, this is not a local matter. They've been killing young black men all over the country. And we are here to say that we're going to stand with Stephon Clark and the leaders of his family. We are putting aside our differences. It's time for preachers to come out the pulpit. It's time for politicians to come out the office. It's time for us to go down and stop this madness.
These are the wrong people to stop the madness. And as I'm telling you, I'm looking at the video here. Next to Sharpton was Stevante, who is clearly out of control and full of himself. And this will lead to more conflict, more hate, and unfortunately, more dead, unarmed black men at the hands of police officers. Russia has responded to the U.S. and other nations, announcing it will expel 150 Western diplomats, exactly 60 of them American. That's the number that we expelled of Russia's diplomats from the United States. And the coverage that I have here in my hand, first from the New York Times, continues to report as fact the underlying elements that are far from proven. The article reads, "The crisis over the poisoning of a former Russian double agent and his daughter has driven tensions between the Kremlin and the West to their highest pitch in decades." They don't even use alleged, reported, accused, any of those modifiers. They go on to recite a litany of evidence-free claims. Relations were already rocky over Moscow's roles in the war in Syria, Ukraine, its forcible annexation of Crimea, its meddling in elections in the United States and elsewhere, the assassination of Kremlin foes in Russia and abroad, cyber attacks and campaigns of disinformation against other countries. Now, I realize that Russia is not pure and that some of these things may be true. I have allowed that Putin may be responsible for the attempt to poison Sergei Skripal, and his daughter happened to be there. But we don't have any evidence. And to ratchet up confrontation without evidence that could risk a military conflict with a nuclear power, I think is downright obscene and just ridiculous. Now, the Times does note the denials. Mr. Putin and his government have denied any involvement in the March 4th attack. Then they note, the British government has not made its evidence public, but has shared it with its major allies. Now, why is it that the evidence of this alleged nerve agent, Novichok, can be shared with allies, but can't be shared in some form with the public? And we are learning today, after yesterday's interview on the BBC with the niece of Sergei Skripal, who said they may never recover, well, the daughter, Yulia, has been taken out of critical condition. She is showing improvement. The Times reports Skripal's father remains in critical but stable condition. The first responder, Sergeant Nick Bailey, was released from the hospital a week ago. So exposure to this is survivable, as Yulia and Nick Bailey can tell us. But we have no official information on Sergei Skripal. And the latest little tidbit that's been dropped is that investigators found the strongest source of the alleged nerve agent on the front door of Skripal's home. This helps explain some of the inconsistencies in the reporting about investigations at the park where they were found non-responsive, and investigations at the home where it's believed that Nick Bailey came into contact with this substance. So shifting from the New York Times to Vice as my source here, Vice says that Skripal and his daughter were likely poisoned at home after police found the highest concentration of a deadly nerve agent on the front door of Skripal's house in Salisbury. No evidence was offered. This is a report that is treated as fact. But we don't cite an individual. We don't have a meter or some kind of reference point that says, oh, yeah, this is why we believe this. Then when we get to The Guardian, they are based in Britain, and they're promoting this full strength. The condition of Yulia Skripal is improving rapidly, doctors say. The 33-year-old is no longer in a critical condition. Her father's condition was described by the hospital as still critical but stable. So, as you can tell, I remain highly skeptical about this episode, and we need proof before we further go extreme on Russia. Not a surprise that Trump tweeted the dismissal of David Shulkin as head of the Department of Veterans Affairs. The surprise is that he didn't pick Dr. Oz or Dr. Phil or any other doctor who's on TV. He picked his own doctor. No, not that crazy guy from New York, the White House doctor Ronnie Jackson, who gave Trump this over-the-top medical exam and review back in January. And this just shows how cavalier Trump is. He imagines that a guy with no experience running a big agency could hop into the VA and make it all work, improve health care for our veterans. But David Shulkin is not taking this lying down. Now, he did make a big blunder. He took a trip to Europe on the taxpayer dime. He took his wife with him. He got free tickets to Wimbledon, and that was used, basically, to run him out of office. But he writes that the advocates within the Trump administration for privatizing VA health services reject his approach to an honest debate about philosophical changes at the VA. They saw me as an obstacle to privatization who had to be removed. That's because I'm convinced that privatization is a political issue aimed at rewarding select people and companies with profits, even if it undermines care for veterans. In recent months, the environment in Washington has turned so toxic, chaotic, disrespectful, and subversive it became impossible for me to accomplish the important work that our veterans need and deserve. But behind it all is the effort to privatize the VA, and that is a very alarming development. Federal court judges are not responding to Trump's latest tweet announcing a transgender ban, or at least a partial one, in the military. And this is his third attempt to do it. Maybe I think it is the third. And it's just revolting and ridiculous. Now, many of us are not fully comfortable with transgender persons, with the shift of body parts and all of that. But there is no excuse for Trump's fears to drive this pandering to his base, who likely share the same fears. We all got to just get over it. And, of course, he's resisting. Trump has continued his attacks on Amazon and fellow billionaire Jeff Bezos. And one of his bizarre claims is that Amazon uses our postal system as their delivery boy. I don't know about you, but I use Amazon a little bit. I've never received a delivery via the Postal Service. They have underpaid drivers in unmarked vans. One guy came up my driveway and I couldn't get out. So I don't think that is accurate. But he has the freedom to tweet. Now, the attorney for his attorney got trapped on CNN last night regarding the Stormy Daniels hush money contract. David Schwartz is the lawyer for Michael Cohen, who is the personal lawyer for Trump, and it's Cohen who said that he volunteered to create this hush agreement and pay Stormy Daniels $130,000. But they've gotten caught up in their stories. They can't keep them straight. And what's her name? Erin Burnett cornered the attorney Schwartz last night and got him to say the president was not aware of the agreement. At least Michael Cohen never told him about the agreement. I can tell you that. And on a follow-up, he said he was not aware of any of it. Well, this may seem like a way of getting Trump off the hook and avoiding some of the campaign law violations that have been suggested. But the contract binds Trump under a pseudonym, and he used the initials DD because I guess Carlos Danger was already taken. And in many ways, it grants enforcement remedies solely to Trump. Cohen could argue that when the contract lists various rights and responsibilities for Trump, it really means the corporation he set up, but I doubt a judge would buy that. The contract appears to bind Trump and to grant him rights. So this one ain't over. It's going to go into extra innings. Laura Ingraham has been forced to apologize to David Hogg. David Hogg is the high school student from Parkland, Florida, who's one of the more prominent students who has spoken up. And Laura Ingraham just went off on him in a tweet because David Hogg had been tweeting himself that he was disappointed that 4 colleges had rejected his applications. So Ingraham tweeted, David Hogg rejected by 4 colleges to which he applied, and whines about it. And the accompanying story from Daily Wire refers to Hogg as a self-appointed spokesman for a generation. Now, the attacks from the pro-gun right, including Rush Limbaugh, on the Florida high school students attempt to just completely neutralize them, make them appear to be tools and, mouthpieces for adults. Now, there's no question that the protests last weekend were predominated by adults and that adults helped these young people coordinate them and provided some of the money for it. But Laura Ingraham has had to walk back her comments because David Hogg launched an advertiser boycott. He got TripAdvisor and several others to say we're going to pull our commercials from Laura Ingram's show on Fox. And so, is it today? Yeah, today she tweeted, any student should be proud of his 4.2 GPA, including David Hogg. On reflection, in the spirit of Holy Week, I apologize for any upset or hurt my tweet caused him or any of the brave victims of Parkland. Yeah, you can get them when you threaten them financially. I want to alert you that Monday, all of the teachers in the state of Oklahoma are planning to walk out. The state legislature, trying to respond to their demands, raised taxes for the first time in 28 years. But they're only offering the teachers a $6,000 raise. Oklahoma's teachers rank 50th among the 50 states in their pay levels. They haven't had a raise in 10 years, and the teachers are well within their rights to hold out for more. I think it's going to be interesting to see the Okies fight this one out. And finally today, a gruesome statistic from here in California related to the opioid crisis. Taking a look at the last 5 years, there has been a rise of 775% in the number of uses of overdose treatments like naloxone that you're aware of. The numbers from 583,000 units per year to 5.1 million. And your humble host is making a transition this weekend. I have qualified for Medicare, and so I have resigned my test ride of Obamacare. And it's been 4 years and 4 months that I've been using Obamacare. It saved me over $25,000, and I'm grateful for that. And it helped me bridge the last few years before I qualified for Medicare. But it is still a big mess. It empowered the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, and the HMOs to continue to drive up rates, deny coverage. And we need single payer, Medicare for all. The solution is right there. It's achievable. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. I remain your humble host, Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.